Welcome back, dear friend. Tonight, we'll take a journey together into the long and fascinating history of Switzerland, a landlocked country nestled in the heart of Europe, where mountains rise like ancient guardians and lakes mirror centuries of stories. Switzerland is known today for its neutrality, its chocolates, and its watches, but behind the peaceful surface lies a history filled with battles, alliances, independence, and resilience. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you enjoy the type of content that merges myth and mystery. And hey, let us know from where you are watching and what time it is for you right now. Sometimes our stories are better than sleep, and other times they make you dream louder. It's time now to dim the lights, turn on a fan for some noise, and let's cover what we have for tonight together. Before there was a Switzerland, there were glaciers, valleys, and tribes. The earliest human traces date back over 150,000 years, when hunters and gatherers roamed these alpine lands. By the Neolithic period, around 5000 BC, settlements appeared near lake shores with wooden stilt houses built above water for safety and trade. When the first humans stepped into these valleys, it was not with the thought of founding a nation, but with a simple instinct to survive. Archaeologists have discovered stone tools dating back more than 150,000 years. Imagine one of those early humans standing at the edge of a glacial lake, holding a carefully chipped flint blade in their hand. They lived in small groups, following herds of animals, hunting reindeer and bison, gathering roots and berries where they could find them. Nights were long, winters were unforgiving, and yet, slowly, human presence became part of the alpine landscape. By around 5000 BC, the last great ice sheets had retreated, leaving fertile valleys and lakes behind. People began to settle, building small communities along the lake shores. These were the famous stilt house villages, built on wooden platforms above the water. Why build above the lake? Partly for safety. The water protected them from wild animals and from rival groups. It also kept their supplies cool and preserved, a natural refrigerator in an age before such inventions existed. These stilt houses, reconstructed today in open-air museums, show us what life must have looked like. Small wooden huts, smoke rising from fire pits, children playing on wooden walkways, the sound of water lapping beneath the floors. These early farmers brought with them new skills. They cultivated wheat and barley in small plots of land, and they domesticated animals like cows, pigs, and goats. Picture an early Swiss farmer guiding a plow pulled by an ox, while in the distance, snow still glitters on mountain peaks. The rhythms of planting and harvesting replaced the restless wandering of earlier ages. Community life revolved around cycles of the seasons: sowing in spring, tending in summer, harvesting in autumn, and surviving the long winters together. But life was not easy. Storms could sweep across the lakes, flooding stilt house villages. Archaeological evidence shows that some settlements were rebuilt again and again, sometimes moving further inland after destruction. Disease, hunger, and the unpredictability of the natural world were constant companions. Yet, even in this harsh life, people found time for art and ritual. Jewelry made of bones and shells has been discovered, suggesting a desire for beauty even in survival. Small figurines and carved objects hint at early spiritual beliefs, perhaps reverence for the forces of nature that so clearly dominated their lives. As centuries passed, communities grew larger. Trade routes began to form, even at this early stage, from Italy to the south, from France to the west, from Germany to the north. Goods made their way into the Swiss valleys. Pieces of obsidian from volcanic regions, seashells from distant shores, and precious copper tools reveal that Switzerland was not isolated, but already connected to a wider European network. Imagine a trader carrying a bag of goods across mountain passes, his path dangerous and steep, but driven by the promise of exchange. By the Bronze Age, around 2200 BC, these communities had developed remarkable skills in metallurgy. Bronze tools and weapons, shiny and durable, replaced stone. Burial sites from this period show warriors with swords, axes, and ornaments, suggesting that social hierarchies were emerging. Chiefs or leaders may have held power over villages, their authority symbolized by the bronze they owned. Picture a burial mound overlooking a valley filled with the belongings of a leader, weapons, jewelry, and perhaps offerings to guide him into the next world. The Bronze Age also left us with evidence of early communication. Symbols scratched onto pottery and carvings hint at proto-writing, a system of signs perhaps used to record ownership, trade, or ritual. It's not writing as we know it today, but it marks the first steps toward recording history rather than letting it fade into memory. Then came the Iron Age, beginning around 800 BC. Iron tools were harder, sharper, and more durable than bronze. The people of Switzerland adapted quickly, and their settlements grew more sophisticated. Archaeological digs show fortified villages with walls, towers, and gates. Life was becoming more organized, more structured. These were the ancestors of the Celtic tribes who would one day be known as the Helvetii. But for now, let us linger in this prehistoric world. Imagine the sound of a wooden boat gliding across a lake at dawn, the mist rising slowly from the water, the faint call of birds echoing through the forest. A fisherman casts a net, woven from fibers, into the still water, hoping to catch enough fish for his family. Back in the village, children play near the water's edge, laughing, while elders tell stories by the fire. Some stories are of the spirits of the mountains, others of the ancestors who came before. These stories, though never written, form the first myths of the land that would one day be Switzerland. Through thousands of years, Switzerland's prehistoric people endured and adapted. They carved out a living in valleys between towering mountains. They learned to work the land, and they developed skills that would carry their descendants into the next great chapter of history. Prehistoric Switzerland may seem distant, but it laid the foundations, the connection to land, the spirit of resilience, and the balance with nature that still echo in Swiss culture today. Now that we have drifted gently through the prehistoric world of Switzerland, let us move forward in time to an age when new people and new ideas were spreading across Europe. The year is no longer measured in tens of thousands, but in centuries. Around the first millennium before our era, across the rolling hills, forests, and valleys of Central Europe, a cultural wave arose. These were the Celts, a people whose language, art, and beliefs spread like threads across the continent. Switzerland, sitting in the very heart of Europe, became a crossroads for these Celtic tribes. It was not just a land of mountains and lakes, but a passage To the north stretched the Germanic forests, to the south, the glittering lands of Italy, to the west, the fertile plains of Gaul, and to the east, the mysteries of the Danube. The people who settled here could not help but feel the pull of travelers, traders, and warriors moving along these routes. Among these Celtic groups, one name has survived above all, the Helvetii. You may have seen their legacy without realizing it, for even today Switzerland is often referred to by the Latin name Helvetia. On coins, on stamps, on monuments, the word still lingers, echoing a tribe that lived here over 2,000 years ago. But what were the Helvetii like? Let us imagine a Helvetian village, perhaps around 400 BC. It is springtime, and the snow is melting in the mountains, filling streams that rush through the valleys. Small wooden houses cluster together, each one built from logs and thatched roofs. Smoke curls gently upward from hearth fires inside. Outside, children chase one another, their laughter mingling with the lowing of cattle and the bleating of goats. Farmers tend to fields of barley and wheat, while hunters return from the forest with deer slung across their shoulders. The Helvetii were not primitive wanderers. They had a society that was organized, vibrant, and deeply rooted in their environment. They were skilled metal workers, forging iron swords, spearheads, and agricultural tools. They wore jewelry made of bronze and gold, decorated with swirling, intricate patterns that are still recognized as hallmarks of Celtic art. Imagine a chieftain seated at a wooden table, wearing a heavy gold torque around his neck, a symbol not only of wealth, but of power. Social life among the Helvetii was shaped by clans and extended families. Each clan owed loyalty to its leader, who in turn sought to prove his strength in war and his generosity in peace. Feasting played an important role on nights when the harvest was plentiful or after a successful raid. Villagers would gather in large halls. Picture a long wooden table covered with roasted meats, bread, and ale brewed from barley. Music fills the air, the rhythmic beat of drums, the high, clear notes of pipes, and voices rising together in song. These were moments of community, of storytelling, of remembering ancestors and heroes. But the Helvetii, like many Celtic peoples, were also warriors. They fought not only to defend their lands, but also to expand them. Their warriors were feared across Europe, described by ancient writers as fierce and daring. Imagine them preparing for battle, tall men with wild hair, their bodies painted or tattooed, their shields decorated with bold patterns, and long swords glinting in the sun. They charged not in silence, but with shouts and horns, a roar meant to unnerve their enemies. And yet, they were not only fighters, they were also farmers, herders, and traders. Archaeological finds reveal that they exchanged goods far and wide. Wine jars from the Mediterranean have been uncovered in their settlements, proof that traders carried Roman wine across the Alps to thirsty Celtic chieftains. In return, the Helvetii offered furs, cattle, and slaves. A village in Switzerland at this time was not isolated. It was connected to a much larger world. Religion played a central role in Helvetian life. The Celts did not build great temples of stone like the Romans or Greeks. Instead, they worshipped in groves, forests, and natural places. Picture a sacred oak tree on a hill, its branches stretching wide, leaves whispering in the wind. Here, druids, wise men, and spiritual leaders would conduct rituals, Offerings were left in rivers and lakes, for the Celts believed water was a gateway to the divine. Weapons, jewelry, and even human sacrifices were given to appease gods and spirits. For the Helvetii, the natural world was alive with power. The mountains were not just stone, they were the dwelling places of spirits. Rivers were not just water, they were lifelines to the sacred. By the 2nd century BC, the Helvetii were powerful enough to be noticed by their neighbors to the south, the Romans. The Mediterranean world, with its organized armies and vast cities, looked north and saw a land of tribes, rich with resources, but unruly in spirit. To the Helvetii, Rome was both a trading partner and a looming threat. Life was not easy for the Helvetii. Pressure came not only from Rome, but also from other tribes. Germanic groups were moving southward, pressing into Celtic lands. This pressure would eventually lead to one of the most dramatic moments in Helvetian history, their Great Migration, around 58 BC, facing pressure from Germanic tribes and perhaps searching for richer lands. The Helvetii decided to abandon their homeland. Some ancient accounts say as many as 300,000 people packed up their lives, men, women, children, animals, wagons, and set off westward toward Gaul. Imagine the sight, an endless column of people moving slowly across fields and rivers, carrying with them not just possessions, but hopes for a new future. But their journey was not to be easy. Waiting for them was Julius Caesar, the Roman general whose ambitions stretched as far as the stars. Caesar saw the Helveti's migration not as a simple movement of people, but as a challenge to Roman power. And so, at the Battle of Bibracte in 58 BC, the Helvetii were confronted by Rome's legions. The clash was fierce. Celtic warriors charged bravely, their long swords swinging, their shields locked. But Rome's discipline, its formations, and its relentless organization proved overwhelming. The Helvetii were defeated, and many were forced back into Switzerland, their dreams of new lands shattered. From that moment on, the Helveti's independence began to fade. Rome extended its influence over Switzerland, building roads, cities, and fortresses. The Celts would not disappear overnight. They remained for centuries, their culture blending with Roman ways. But their age of dominance was ending, yet their legacy is still with us. The very name Helvetia lives on, a reminder of a proud, resilient people who lived, farmed, fought, and dreamed in the valleys and mountains of Switzerland. Their art, their myths, and their connection to nature shaped the land's spirit, giving it a heritage that could not be erased even by the might of Rome. As you drift deeper into this story, think of the Helvetii not only as warriors in battle, but as people living everyday lives. A mother baking bread in a clay oven, a child chasing a dog through a village, a druid watching the stars and whispering prayers. They were not so different from us, seeking safety, prosperity, and meaning in a world that was often uncertain. And their story forms the bridge between prehistoric Switzerland and the Roman age that was about to begin. The story of Switzerland now turns to one of the most dramatic transitions in its history, the coming of Rome. We have seen how the Helvetii and other Celtic tribes lived, how they farmed their lands, forged their weapons, and honored the sacred groves. But to the south, beyond the towering Alps, there was a rising power whose ambitions reached far beyond its own borders. Rome was expanding, and in its hunger for control, it cast its eyes toward the north. The Roman Republic of the 1st century BC was not yet an empire, but it was already restless, stretching its grasp across the Mediterranean. Its legions were disciplined, its generals ambitious, and its people accustomed to conquest. Among those generals was Julius Caesar, a man whose name you already know, a man whose story would become entwined with the Helvetii and the lands of Switzerland. Let us return to that fateful year, 58 BC. The Helvetii, pressed by Germanic tribes and tempted by the fertile lands of Gaul, had gathered in a great migration. Perhaps 300,000 men, women, and children left their homes, driving their cattle, pushing their wagons, carrying their hopes westward. It was a movement unlike anything the Romans had ever seen, a tide of people, entire villages uprooted, carrying with them the weight of centuries. But Julius Caesar, newly appointed governor of Gaul, saw this migration as a threat. To him, the Helvetii were not simply a people seeking new lands. They were a force that could destabilize Rome's influence in Gaul, and Caesar was never one to ignore an opportunity. He decided to act. The clash came near a place called Bibrecht in what is now eastern France. Imagine the scene. The Helvetii warriors forming up in their tribal ranks, their long swords glinting in the sun, their shields painted with swirling designs. Beside them stood their families, wagons circled for protection. For this was not just an army, but an entire people on the move. Facing them were the Roman legions, drilled and disciplined, each man a cog in a machine that had conquered much of the known world. The battle raged fiercely. The Helvetii charged with passion and bravery, but the Romans held steady, their shields locked, their formations unbroken. They advanced with relentless precision. Dust rose into the air. The cries of battle echoed through the hills, and slowly, inevitably, the Helvetii were pushed back. The Roman historian Caesar himself would later write of the battle, recording it not only as a victory, but as part of his own legend. The defeat of the Helvetii was not the end of their people, but it marked a turning point. Many were forced to return to Switzerland, their dreams of new lands crushed. Rome, meanwhile, had begun its slow but steady march into their territory. Over the coming decades, Switzerland would be drawn ever closer into the Roman world. What did this mean for everyday life? Imagine the changes as Roman influence spread. Where once there had been dirt tracks, the Romans built paved roads, straight and enduring, cutting through valleys and across mountains. These roads linked Switzerland to the wider Roman network, stretching all the way to Italy, Gaul, and beyond. Traders could now move more easily, bringing wine, olive oil, and fine pottery into Swiss towns, while exporting cattle, hides, and iron. Cities began to rise. One of the most important was Aventicum, near modern-day Avenches. It became the Roman capital of Helvetia, complete with an amphitheater, temples, and baths. Picture its streets, lined with stone buildings, its citizens dressed in togas, speaking Latin, conducting business in bustling marketplaces. The Celtic villages of wood and thatch gave way to Roman towns of stone and tile. Yet beneath the surface, Celtic traditions remained, blending with Roman customs in a slow, quiet fusion. The Roman conquest was not simply about soldiers and battles. It was also about culture. Latin became the language of administration, law, and trade, leaving traces that survive even today in Switzerland's multilingual heritage. Roman religion mingled with Celtic beliefs. Jupiter and Mars stood alongside local deities, worshipped in shrines scattered across the land. Archaeologists have uncovered altars where Roman gods were honored in distinctly Celtic styles, showing that the two worlds did not erase each other, but intertwined. Daily life in Roman Switzerland was varied. In the countryside, farmers continued their work, now using Roman tools and techniques. In towns, artisans crafted pottery, glass, and metalwork, often imitating Roman styles, but adding local touches. Soldiers patrolled the borders, for Switzerland was not only a land of farms, but also a frontier. The Alpine passes were strategic gateways between Italy and Gaul, and Rome valued them highly. Fortresses were built to guard these routes, their ruins still visible in places today. But the Roman presence also brought challenges. Taxes were collected, often a heavy burden for the rural poor. Roman law replaced tribal customs, reshaping justice and authority. The Helvetii, once free to migrate as they pleased, were now part of a vast empire that demanded loyalty and order. Some accepted this new reality, others resisted quietly, clinging to their traditions in the shadows of Roman temples. For nearly 5 centuries, Switzerland remained within the Roman sphere. Towns grew, trade flourished, and Roman culture seeped into the fabric of daily life. Yet the land's mountains and valleys, its stubborn independence, never fully yielded. Beneath the veneer of Roman order, the spirit of the Helvetii endured, waiting for the next great upheaval that history would bring. And so, as you drift deeper into this story, picture Switzerland under Rome's gaze, a farmer leading his oxen through a field, watched by a Roman tax collector, a child in a venticum, learning Latin words, while his grandmother whispers old Celtic tales, a soldier standing guard at a mountain pass, snow swirling around him, dreaming of the warm sun of Italy. Life was not simple, not uniform, but layered, complex, and human. The Roman conquest did not erase Switzerland. It reshaped it, setting the stage for centuries to come. Close your eyes and picture Switzerland, no longer a land of purely Celtic villages, but one woven firmly into the grand tapestry of Rome. The year is perhaps the 2nd century AD, the height of Roman power. Across Europe, from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Mesopotamia, the eagle standards of Rome fly high, and in the center of this vast empire sits Switzerland, not as an isolated mountain refuge, but as a vibrant, essential crossroads. The Helvetii and their neighbors had been conquered, yes, but conquest was only the beginning. What followed was centuries of Romanization, where roads, cities, and customs remade the land. Yet, beneath the polished stone of amphitheaters and the marble of temples, the heartbeat of everyday life went on. Families working, trading, celebrating, and enduring, much as they always had. Let us wander through this world together, slowly, step by step. Imagine yourself entering Aventicum, the Roman capital of Helvetia, located near today's Avenches. You approach the city along a straight, paved road, carefully engineered, lined with milestones that tell you how far you are from Rome itself. The road leads you through the countryside, where farms stretch across the valleys, fields of wheat sway gently in the breeze, vineyards climb the hillsides, and orchards bear fruit Farmers toil under the sun, their tools of iron glinting, their oxen pulling plows through fertile soil. As you draw closer, the city rises before you, its walls tall and proud, gates wide and welcoming. Aventicum is not a village of wood and thatch, but a Roman town of stone, designed in orderly grids, with streets running straight and wide. At its heart lies the Forum, a public square buzzing with life. Merchants call out their wares: pottery, fabrics, olive oil from the Mediterranean, salt from local mines, cheese from the Alps, bronze ornaments from distant Gaul. The mingling of accents tells you that Aventicum is a place of meeting, a place where cultures converge. Let us pause here, in the Forum. Picture the people, men in tunics or togas, their sandals slapping against the stone pavement, women carrying baskets, their hair carefully styled, perhaps adorned with pins or combs, imported from Rome, children darting between stalls, laughing, chasing one another, weaving between carts pulled by donkeys. Overhead, the midday sun warms the rooftops of clay tiles, while the scent of bread baking drifts from a nearby shop. Life in Roman Switzerland was not all bustle and trade, though. It was also shaped by ritual and leisure. Step into one of Aventicum's temples, where Roman gods stand alongside Celtic ones. Here, Jupiter, king of the gods, is honored with statues, but nearby you might also find shrines to local deities, spirits of rivers, mountains, and forests. The Romans were practical in their religion, often adopting the gods of conquered peoples and blending them with their own. For the Helvetii and their neighbors, this meant that their sacred groves and springs were not forgotten, but rather folded into the great Roman pantheon. Now, walk further through the city and find yourself at the amphitheater. Imagine the sound of the crowd, thousands of voices cheering as gladiators step onto the sandy floor. The games may not have been as grand as those in Rome itself, but even here in Switzerland, spectacles entertained and united the people. Wild animal hunts, athletic contests, and staged battles filled the amphitheater with excitement. For a few hours, everyday worries melted away as the crowd lost itself in the drama of the arena. But life was not all about spectacle. Just as important were the baths, large complexes where people gathered not only to wash, but to socialize, to discuss politics, and to conduct business. Step into the baths of Aventicum or Augusta Raurica. Near modern Basel, the air is warm and moist, scented with oils and herbs. People move from the hot caldarium to the cooler frigidarium, pausing to chat with friends, to strike deals, or simply to relax. For the Romans, bathing was as much about community as cleanliness, and in Switzerland, this tradition took firm root. Let us now leave the city and travel into the countryside. Roman villas dot the valleys, large estates owned by wealthy landowners. These villas are not simple farmhouses, but elegant residences, with mosaic floors, painted walls, and courtyards open to the sky. In the kitchens, slaves prepare meals, bread, cheese, and stews flavored with herbs. In the storerooms, amphorae of wine and olive oil line the walls. In the fields beyond, peasants labor, their work feeding not only the estate, but the towns and soldiers stationed across the land. The Roman army was always near. Switzerland's Alpine passes were vital, connecting Italy to Gaul and Germany. Fortresses were built at strategic points, their garrisons ready to defend against incursions from Germanic tribes. Imagine a Roman soldier standing watch on a cold winter night, his cloak wrapped tightly around him, his breath forming clouds in the air. Far from the warmth of Rome, he guards the empire's edge, listening to the wind whistle through the mountains. Yet even with the presence of Rome's might, daily life for most people was steady, grounded in routine. Farmers rose with the sun, tended their fields, and cared for their animals. Craftsmen shaped clay into pots, hammered metal into tools, or carved wood into furniture. Traders moved along roads and rivers, their carts creaking, their voices bargaining. Families gathered in the evenings, sharing meals, telling stories, and passing down traditions that blended old Celtic roots with new Roman customs. And let us not forget the small details, the ones that make the past feel alive. A child learning to write Latin letters on a wax tablet, his hand clumsy but eager. A woman weaving cloth, her fingers deft, her thoughts perhaps wandering to the next festival. A farmer repairing his roof, muttering about the weather. A priest lighting a candle in a shrine, whispering prayers in both Latin and Celtic words. These quiet, ordinary moments built the fabric of Roman Switzerland as much as roads or battles did. But history always moves. For centuries, Rome's presence brought order, prosperity, and connection to the wider world. Yet beneath the surface, change brewed. To the north, Germanic tribes grew stronger, pressing against the Roman frontier. To the south, the empire itself was beginning to falter. The golden age of Rome could not last forever, and Switzerland, resting in the middle of Europe, would soon feel the tremors of its decline. For now, though, let us linger in this moment, in the everyday life of Roman Switzerland, a life of markets and meals, of temples and traditions, of roads stretching into the distance, and of families making a home in the shadow of empire. It is a life at once ordinary and extraordinary, a rhythm of existence that, though long past, still echoes in the stones, the ruins, and the memories of Switzerland today. Imagine the mighty walls of a Roman town in Switzerland, strong and proud, standing against the alpine winds. For centuries, these walls had been a symbol of stability, but now, in the twilight of the Roman Empire, the stones seem less certain, the defenses weaker, and the people within a little more anxious. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries AD were turbulent times. Rome, once the unshakable master of the Mediterranean, was faltering under the weight of its vastness. Emperors came and went in quick succession, some murdered, others defeated in battle. The empire faced external threats on all sides: Persians in the east, Goths in the Balkans, and in the north, the restless Germanic tribes who looked at Rome's rich lands with hungry eyes. Switzerland, perched at the very heart of Europe, could not escape this growing storm. Its position as a crossroads between Italy, Gaul, and Germania made it both valuable and vulnerable. The Roman roads, once channels of trade, now became highways for invasion. In the 3rd century, waves of Germanic tribes, such as the Alemanni, began pressing into Roman territory. The Alemanni were fierce and determined, their warriors strong, their communities united in search of fertile lands. They crossed the Rhine, swept into Gaul, and repeatedly struck into Switzerland. Roman forts along the border strained to hold them back, but cracks were showing. Picture a Roman farmer near Aventicum in the year 260. He tends his vineyard, aware that beyond the horizon, raiders may be approaching. The sound of boots on gravel roads no longer promises the arrival of peaceful traders, but of armies. When the Alemanni attacked, towns were burned, villas abandoned, and families fled into the hills for safety. Aventicum, once a shining Roman capital, fell into decline, its amphitheater and temples slowly sinking into ruin. Still, Rome tried to respond. In the later 3rd century, emperors like Diocletian and Constantine restructured the empire, building new fortifications and reorganizing provinces. Switzerland saw new forts rise at key passes, designed to hold back incursions. Soldiers stationed in these outposts lived harsh, isolated lives, watching the forests for movement, aware that their foes were never far away. But the Alemanni were relentless. By the 4th century, they had established themselves firmly in northern Switzerland, pushing Roman influence southward into the Alpine valleys. The language of Latin, once dominant in towns, began to retreat. Germanic dialects took root, slowly shaping the linguistic map of the region for centuries to come. Alongside the Alemanni were the Burgundians, another Germanic tribe who moved into western Switzerland. They were eventually granted land by Rome as foederati, allies allowed to settle in exchange for military support. Imagine their migration, families traveling in wagons, carrying tools and livestock, moving into valleys that would one day be part of the region of Vaud and Geneva. This blending of peoples was not always violent. Many Germanic tribes settled peacefully, farming the land alongside Romanized locals. But with each passing decade, Rome's grip loosened, roads fell into disrepair, towns shrank, and trade slowed. The empire's once bright flame flickered. By the year 476, the Western Roman Empire officially fell, its last emperor deposed in Italy. Switzerland, like much of Europe, was left in the hands of the so-called barbarian kingdoms. For the people who lived here, the transition was not marked by a single day, but by years of slow change. A Roman tax collector might no longer arrive. A Roman garrison might leave its post. A Germanic chieftain might take control of a valley. Life continued, but under new rulers, in new tongues, with new customs. The collapse of Rome was not only political, it was cultural. Roman amphitheaters and temples fell silent. Roads once filled with merchants grew overgrown. Yet, the Roman legacy endured in subtle ways. In the layout of towns, in the stones of roads that still guided travelers, in the vineyards that still bore fruit, and in the Christian faith, which was spreading steadily across the land. Picture a quiet village in 5th century Switzerland. The people gathered in a small wooden church, simple but sacred, where a priest reads from Latin scriptures. Outside, Alemanni farmers tend their fields, speaking in their own tongue, their children playing in the shadow of Roman ruins. The empire may have fallen, but life continues, weaving together the old and the new. This was the world of Switzerland at the dawn of the Middle Ages, a land of transition where Rome's grandeur faded into memory and new cultures took root in the valleys and mountains. The Roman order was gone, but the story of Switzerland was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. The fall of Rome left behind ruins, broken roads, and fading memories of empire. Yet out of that quiet, a new world began to take shape in Switzerland. Imagine the 6th century landscape, abandoned Roman villas slowly crumbling under vines, amphitheaters filled with silence instead of cheers, And across the valleys, small wooden villages where Germanic tribes tilled the land and herded animals. This was the beginning of the early Middle Ages, a time of transformation. The Alemanni, who had pushed into northern Switzerland, became the dominant presence in the German-speaking regions. They were farmers and warriors, living in scattered settlements, their lives rooted in the rhythms of the seasons. They spoke a Germanic language that would, over centuries, evolve into the Swiss German dialects heard today. To the west and south, the Burgundians had settled. They too were Germanic, but their proximity to Roman Gaul meant they absorbed Latin influences more deeply in their lands, stretching toward Geneva and the Rhone Valley. A blend of languages and cultures began to take root. From this mixture, the seeds of French-speaking Switzerland were sown. Life in these centuries was hard, simple, and deeply tied to survival. Most people lived in small wooden houses with thatched roofs, clustered around open courtyards where animals were kept. Fields were plowed with wooden tools pulled by oxen. Diets were plain: bread, porridge, milk, cheese, and whatever meat could be hunted or raised. Winters were long and often cruel, and hunger was a constant shadow for peasants who depended on their harvests. And yet, this was not a time without beauty or hope. Across Switzerland, Christianity began to spread, slowly at first, then more firmly. Missionaries traveled into valleys and forests, preaching to Germanic tribes, baptizing chieftains, and building small churches where once only sacred groves had stood. The Christian faith carried with it not only new beliefs, but also new centers of learning and culture. One of the greatest of these centers was the Abbey of St. Gall, founded in the 7th century. The story begins with an Irish monk named Gallus, who traveled into Switzerland as a missionary. Tradition says that he settled near Lake Constance in a quiet forest where he built a hermitage. Over time, his followers established a monastery on that site. By the 8th century, the Abbey of St. Gall had become one of the most important cultural centers in Europe. Picture its scriptorium: rows of monks sitting at wooden desks, their quills scratching across parchment. By the light of candles, they copied religious texts, preserved Roman knowledge, and even created original works. The Library of St. Gall grew to hold thousands of manuscripts, some of which survive to this day, offering us a glimpse into the mind of the Middle Ages. The famous Plan of St. Gall, a detailed architectural drawing of an ideal monastery, remains one of the treasures of medieval Europe. These monasteries were more than religious centers. They were hubs of education, medicine, and agriculture. The monks tended gardens filled with herbs, both for cooking and for healing. They taught reading and writing to the sons of nobles. They provided refuge for travelers crossing the Alps. In a world where much of the Roman order had collapsed, monasteries kept knowledge alive, flickering like candles in the darkness. At the same time, Switzerland was drawn into the orbit of powerful kingdoms. In the 8th and 9th centuries, the land came under the rule of the Frankish Empire, led by the mighty Charlemagne. He was crowned emperor in the year 800, reviving the dream of a united Christian Europe. Switzerland, with its passes and valleys, was part of this empire, a land watched closely for its strategic importance. Charlemagne and his successors established order through a system of counts and bishops. Local rulers governed regions, collected taxes, and maintained law in the name of the emperor. Christianity flourished under their protection, with new churches and monasteries rising across Switzerland. Latin once again became the language of administration and learning, though Germanic and Romance dialects continued to shape everyday speech. For ordinary people, though, life was still bound to the land. A peasant in the early Middle Ages lived much as his ancestors had, plowing fields, tending sheep, cutting wood in the forests. His world was small, often limited to his village and the nearest market town. Travel was dangerous, roads were rough, and bandits lurked in the wilderness. But faith offered meaning. Festivals marked the rhythm of the year. Easter, Christmas, harvest celebrations, all blending Christian ritual with echoes of older pagan traditions. The contrast of this era is striking. On the one hand, great abbeys like St. Gall and Reichenau preserved knowledge and culture. On the other, villages lived in poverty, vulnerability, and simplicity. A noble lord might feast in his wooden hall, surrounded by warriors, while peasants outside worked tirelessly to provide the grain, meat, and cheese that sustained him. Society was layered, and Switzerland was no exception. Still, the mountains shaped a unique independence here. Unlike the vast plains of France or Germany, Swiss valleys often stood isolated, connected only by narrow passes. This geography encouraged local traditions and a sense of autonomy that would remain central to Swiss identity for centuries. A village might owe allegiance to a distant king, but day to day, it governed itself, bound by local customs and communal decisions. By the 10th century, as the Carolingian dynasty weakened, Switzerland once again found itself at a crossroads. The empire fractured into smaller realms, and power passed into the hands of feudal lords and bishops. Castles began to rise on hilltops, symbols of both protection and oppression. The early Middle Ages were giving way to the feudal age, with all its struggles, loyalties, and rivalries. Yet, through all of this, the seeds of Switzerland's future were being planted. Germanic and Romance peoples living side by side, monasteries preserving knowledge and shaping culture, valleys fostering independence and resilience. The early Middle Ages may seem like a quiet, dimly lit chapter, but it was in this time that Switzerland began to take on the character that would define it for centuries to come. A land both divided and united, humble and profound, fragile yet enduring. Picture a lonely castle perched on a rocky hilltop, its stone walls rising above the misty valleys of Switzerland. Below, peasants plow narrow fields, oxen straining as they turn the soil, while in the distance, the sound of a church bell drifts through the morning air. This is Switzerland in the feudal age, a land of lords and serfs, knights and peasants, monasteries and markets, where power and survival depended on loyalty, faith, and the protection of walls. By the 10th and 11th centuries, Europe had fully embraced the feudal system, and Switzerland was no exception. The Carolingian Empire had fractured, leaving behind a patchwork of smaller kingdoms and principalities. In this fragmented world, local power mattered more than distant kings. Swiss valleys and plateaus were divided among noble families, bishops, and abbots, each ruling their territory as if it were their own miniature kingdom. At the heart of this society was the castle. Castles were both practical fortresses and potent symbols. Imagine riding through a valley and seeing a gray, stone tower looming on a hill, surrounded by wooden palisades, or, later, thick stone walls. From within, a noble lord controlled his lands. He dispensed justice, collected rents, and protected his subjects in times of war. In return, peasants gave him loyalty, labor, and a share of their harvests. For the peasants, life was shaped by feudal obligations. Most were serfs, tied to the land they farmed. They could not freely leave without the Lord's permission, but they were guaranteed protection in return. Their days began with the rising sun, filled with plowing, sowing, harvesting, and tending livestock. In winter, they repaired tools, wove cloth, and prepared for the next cycle of the year. It was a life of hardship, but also of rhythm and routine, deeply connected to the land. Above them stood the knights, the warrior class of the feudal order, trained in combat from youth, clad in chainmail and later plate armor. Knights defended their lords and enforced their will. They were bound by oaths of loyalty, swearing fealty in solemn ceremonies. Imagine a knight kneeling before his lord, placing his hands between the lord's palms, pledging to serve with sword and shield. In return, he might receive land, wealth, or the honor of his station. Yet, Switzerland's mountains shaped this system in unique ways. Unlike the vast feudal estates of France, Swiss lords often controlled smaller, more fragmented lands. Valleys and high pastures required cooperation among communities to survive the harsh winters. This fostered a sense of communal independence that sometimes stood in tension with feudal hierarchies. A village might bow to a distant noble, but within its boundaries, it managed its own pastures, forests, and water rights. Religion played a central role. Monasteries like St. Gall, Einsiedeln, and Dicentis flourished, owning vast tracts of land. Monks not only prayed, but also managed estates, collected rents, and administered justice. For many peasants, the abbot was as powerful as any secular lord. The church also provided spiritual structure, marking the calendar with holy days and festivals, and offering hope of salvation in a world that often felt fragile and uncertain. Feudal Switzerland was also a place of growing trade. Market towns began to rise, especially at crossroads and river valleys. Farmers brought surplus grain, cheese, and wool to sell, while merchants offered salt, iron tools, and cloth. Picture a bustling market square, stalls shaded by canvas, the smell of roasting meat in the air, the sound of traders haggling in a mixture of Germanic and Romance tongues. Though most people lived their entire lives within a few miles of their birth, markets offered glimpses of the wider world. This era also saw the rise of powerful, noble families who would dominate Swiss history for centuries. Chief among them were the Habsburgs, a dynasty that began with modest roots in northern Switzerland, but would one day rule much of Europe. In the feudal age, they built castles, gathered lands, and expanded their influence steadily, valley by valley. Other families, like the Zeringers, also left their mark, founding towns such as Bern and Fribourg that still bear their legacy today. Conflict was a constant undercurrent. Lords fought one another for land and prestige, sending their knights into skirmishes that could devastate peasant villages. Rivalries between noble families shaped the map of Switzerland as alliances shifted and castles were besieged. Yet, despite the violence, communities endured, rebuilding after raids, returning to their fields, and maintaining their traditions. And always, the landscape itself imposed its authority. Winters could isolate entire valleys for months, forcing families to rely on stored grain and dried meats. Avalanches, floods, and storms reminded all who lived here that nature was as powerful as any lord. This constant challenge bred resilience in the people, teaching them to value cooperation, endurance, and the strength of community. By the 12th and 13th centuries, feudal Switzerland had matured into a mosaic of small lordships, bishoprics, and monastic lands. Castles dotted the hills, markets hummed with life, and peasants worked tirelessly under the weight of their obligations. Yet within this patchwork, something new was stirring, an independence, a desire for self-rule that would eventually lead to the birth of the Swiss Confederation. For now, though Switzerland remained firmly feudal, a land of lords and peasants, monks and markets, castles and fields, it was a society built on bonds of loyalty and obligation, fragile in its balance, yet deeply rooted in the mountains and valleys where it took shape. It begins with whispers in the valleys. Peasants and townsfolk, weary of heavy taxes and distant rulers, start to dream of something different. Freedom. Across Switzerland in the late 13th and early 14th centuries, the seeds of independence were being planted, quietly at first, then louder, until they grew into a force that no empire could ignore. By this time, the feudal order was well established. Noble families, such as the Habsburgs, had risen to prominence, building castles, seizing lands, and tightening their grip over the Swiss valleys. The Habsburgs, originally a modest family with roots near the river Aar, were ambitious. They expanded their influence into Austria, becoming one of the most powerful dynasties in Europe. But their hunger for power often pressed heavily on their Swiss subjects. Imagine being a farmer in Uri or Schwyz in the late 1200s. The land is hard enough. Rocky fields, unpredictable weather, long winters. Yet beyond these natural struggles, new burdens fall on your shoulders. Taxes are raised, tolls are demanded for using the mountain passes, and foreign bailiffs are sent to enforce laws. These outsiders, often harsh and corrupt, meddle in local traditions that had long governed communal life. In this tense atmosphere, alliances began to form. The Swiss valleys had a long tradition of communal decision-making. Villagers would gather in assemblies known as Landsgemeinde to settle disputes, divide resources, and make collective choices. This spirit of self-rule clashed sharply with the feudal demands of the Habsburg lords. And so, in 1291, a turning point arrived. Representatives from the valleys of Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden met and swore an oath of mutual defense. This pact, known as the Federal Charter, marked the beginning of the Swiss Confederation. It was not a declaration of modern independence, but a solemn promise that they would stand together, defend one another's freedoms, and resist foreign domination. Picture the scene. As tradition paints it, men gathered on the Rutli meadow overlooking Lake Lucerne, their hands clasped, their words spoken with quiet determination. They pledged that no foreign lord would dictate their fate, and that together they would protect their lands. Whether or not this exact scene unfolded as legend tells, the spirit of the moment is undeniable. It was the birth of Swiss unity. The struggle that followed was not easy. In 1315, at the Battle of Morgarten, Swiss peasants faced the might of the Habsburg knights, armed with little more than halberds, spears, and rocks. The Swiss positioned themselves in narrow mountain passes where the cavalry's advantage was useless. When the Habsburg forces advanced, the Swiss ambushed them, sending knights tumbling into chaos. Against the odds, the Swiss won a stunning victory. This triumph became a legend, proof that determination, courage, and knowledge of the land could overcome even the most powerful armies. It also bound the Confederation more tightly together. More cantons joined in the following decades: Lucerne, Zurich, Zug, Glarus, and Bern, expanding the alliance into a formidable force. Swiss independence was not only forged in battle, but also in daily governance. The Confederation was unique for its time. Unlike kingdoms ruled by monarchs or duchies governed by hereditary nobles, Switzerland's power rested in local assemblies and collective agreements. Each canton managed its own affairs, yet pledged to support the others in times of need. It was an experiment in shared sovereignty, fragile yet resilient. Legends grew around this period, adding color to the struggle. One of the most famous is the tale of William Tell, the skilled marksman forced by a cruel Habsburg bailiff to shoot an apple off his son's head. Tell's defiance and his later role in sparking rebellion became a symbol of Swiss resistance to tyranny. Whether myth or reality, the story captured the imagination, embodying the courage and independence that defined the Swiss spirit. Trade and prosperity also played a role in strengthening the Confederation. The Alpine passes, such as the Gotthard, became vital arteries for commerce between northern and southern Europe. Control of these routes meant wealth from tolls and trade. The Confederate cantons understood the importance of safeguarding these lifelines, and their unity ensured that no single outside power could dominate them. By the 14th and 15th centuries, the Swiss Confederation had established itself as a respected, if sometimes feared, force in Europe. Their armies, composed largely of citizen soldiers, gained a reputation for discipline and ferocity. Victories against powerful foes cemented their standing, while their alliances grew in number and strength. And yet, independence was never absolute. The Confederation remained technically under the loose authority of the Holy Roman Empire, but in practice, the Swiss valleys governed themselves, defended themselves, and lived by their own traditions. Step by step, stone by stone, they built a foundation of freedom that would endure. The rise of Swiss independence was not the end of their struggles, but the beginning of a long journey, one of wars, treaties, and internal divisions. Yet from these humble beginnings in mountain valleys and meadows, Switzerland set itself apart, crafting an identity rooted in unity, resilience, and a fierce love of liberty. A cloud of tension hangs over Europe in the late 15th century, and in the heart of it, Switzerland stands poised between survival and glory. Powerful neighbors watch the young Confederation with a mix of suspicion and envy. Among them is Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, one of the most ambitious rulers of his time. His ambitions stretch across France, the Low Countries, and even into Switzerland's western valleys. He seeks to dominate trade, control mountain passes, and assert his power over the independent Swiss cantons. The Swiss, however, are no longer the scattered peasants of Morgarten. Over the past century, the Confederation has grown stronger, its armies more disciplined, and its people more united. The cantons of Zurich, Lucerne, Uri, Schwyz, Unterwalden, Glarus, Zug, Bern, Solothurn, Freiburg, Schaffhausen, and Appenzell coordinate to defend their freedom. They are small compared to Burgundy's wealth and armies, yet they know their strength lies in strategy, terrain, and determination. The first sparks of conflict appear in 1474 when Burgundy attempts to assert control over the Swiss allied cities and passes. Skirmishes erupt in the rolling hills and narrow valleys. Swiss pikemen, renowned for their discipline and skill, face the heavily armored Burgundian knights. Imagine the scene. Soldiers in long rows, pikes pointed forward, banners fluttering in the wind. The Swiss stand shoulder to shoulder, in tight formations, waiting for the moment to strike. The first major engagement comes at the Battle of Grandson in 1476. Charles the Bold, confident in his numerical advantage, lays siege to the town of Grandson, hoping to crush the Swiss quickly, but the defenders, supported by Swiss forces, hold firm. In the surprise counterattack that follows, the Burgundian army is routed. Cannons roar, knights are scattered, and the Swiss, though fewer in number, emerge victorious. The victory sends shockwaves across Europe, proving that the Confederation is not to be underestimated. Emboldened, the Swiss face Charles again at the Battle of Merton later that year. This time, the Burgundians attempt a more disciplined attack, hoping to exploit any weakness in the Swiss lines. Yet, the Swiss soldiers, seasoned by previous skirmishes, maintain their formations, using the terrain to their advantage. Narrow paths, forests, and hills slow the cavalry and protect the infantry. The Swiss strike decisively, and Charles's forces suffer a crushing defeat. Once more, the Confederation triumphs against a seemingly unstoppable foe. The final clash comes at the Battle of Nancy in 1477. Charles the Bold himself leads his army, determined to regain honor and lands. The Swiss, allied with Lorraine forces, confront him near the city of Nancy. The battle is fierce and chaotic. Imagine the clash of swords, the thunder of hooves, the smoke of fires, and cannon. In the end, Charles falls in battle, leaving Burgundy without its ambitious duke and marking the collapse of his expansionist dreams. These victories solidify the reputation of the Swiss Confederation. Across Europe, armies begin to take notice. The Swiss pikemen and mercenary forces are admired, feared, and sought after in foreign conflicts. Cities, nobles, and kingdoms recognize that the small cantons of Switzerland, united and disciplined, can achieve feats that larger, wealthier powers cannot. But the wars are not just about battles. They reshape the Swiss identity. The Confederation proves that cooperation among cantons can overcome even the greatest threat. Traditions of collective decision-making, mutual defense, and local autonomy are reinforced. The victories of Grandson, Merton, and Nancy are celebrated in songs, stories, and art, becoming part of the Swiss mythology of courage and independence. The aftermath of the Burgundian Wars also affects trade and politics. With Burgundy weakened, Switzerland gains greater control over mountain passes, particularly the important routes through the Jura and Alps. Merchants can move goods with more security, markets flourish, and the Confederation gains influence beyond its borders. The Swiss also begin to attract attention as mercenaries, selling their military skill to other European powers while maintaining loyalty to their own cantons. Life in Switzerland after the wars is a mix of relief, rebuilding, and cautious optimism. Villages damaged by battles are restored, towns expand, and fortifications are improved. Families return to their farms, markets fill with goods, and communities take pride in their newly proven strength. Through these experiences, the Confederation learns not only how to fight, but how to govern, how to protect its people, and how to preserve its independence in a continent dominated by powerful neighbors. The Burgundian Wars mark a turning point in Swiss history. They are not merely battles, they are a demonstration of unity, strategy, and resilience. From the narrow valleys to the mountain passes, from peasant homes to fortified towns, the Confederation's people understand that their freedom is precious and that it must be defended with courage, skill, and cooperation. Through these victories, Switzerland earns its reputation as a land where even small communities, if united and determined, can shape the course of history. The lessons of the Burgundian Wars echo forward, influencing how the Confederation approaches diplomacy, defense, and identity for centuries to come. Across Europe, whispers travel of a small, mountain-bound land whose soldiers are unmatched. Swiss pikemen, disciplined, fearless, and loyal, have become the most sought-after mercenaries on the continent. From Italy to France, Spain to the Low Countries, rulers and generals seek their services, paying handsomely for their skill in battle. The story of Switzerland is no longer confined to its valleys. It spreads across Europe, carried by the strength and reputation of its people. The rise of Swiss mercenaries begins in the late 15th century, following the victories against Burgundy. The Confederation, having defended its independence and proven its military prowess, realizes that these same skills can serve both survival and prosperity. Young men trained in the mountains and valleys take contracts abroad, fighting in foreign armies for pay and honor. They bring home wealth, experience, and tales of distant lands, weaving Switzerland into the broader European stage. Imagine a Swiss mercenary traveling toward Italy in the early 16th century. He marches in tight formation with hundreds of fellow pikemen, their long spears glinting in the sunlight. Each step is precise, rehearsed, the clatter of armor echoing through the valleys. Their discipline makes them feared opponents, capable of holding their ground against knights and cavalry that would scatter ordinary infantry. The Italian Wars, beginning in 1494, offer the Swiss ample opportunity to prove themselves. They fight for the French, for the papacy, and for various Italian city-states. Battles like Novara, Marignano, and Bicocca showcase their skill and endurance. In many accounts, Swiss pikemen hold positions that armies twice their size cannot break, their courage and formation becoming legendary. Yet even in foreign lands, the Swiss maintain a code: loyalty to their employers, honor in combat, and an enduring connection to their homeland. While the soldiers roam Europe, back home, Switzerland itself is changing. The Renaissance, a movement of art, science, and humanism, begins to seep into the Confederation. Cities like Basel, Geneva, and Zurich become centers of printing, scholarship, and learning. Imagine the streets of Basel, In the early 16th century, workshops filled with books, scholars debating classical texts, craftsmen creating intricate engravings and woodcuts. Knowledge flows along the Rhine, connecting Switzerland to the intellectual currents of Italy, France, and the Low Countries. Religion, too, begins to stir. The seeds of the Reformation are planted as humanist ideas challenge old traditions. Figures such as Ulrich Zwingli in Zurich emerge, questioning the authority of the Catholic Church and calling for reforms. Imagine a city square in Zurich, citizens gathered to hear sermons, pamphlets spreading ideas that will eventually reshape faith and governance in Switzerland. These changes are both spiritual and social, influencing education, law, and civic life. Back in the countryside, daily life continues much as it always has. Farmers tend the fields, shepherds guide their flocks along mountain pastures, and artisans craft tools, cloth, and furniture. The wealth brought home by mercenaries supports families and towns, allowing for modest improvements, stone bridges replacing wooden ones, better homes, small churches built with sturdier walls. Life is still grounded in the rhythm of the seasons, in the cycles of planting and harvest, in the enduring connection to the land. Trade thrives during this period as well. Swiss merchants carry goods along mountain passes and rivers, exchanging salt, wine, cloth, and metalwork. The Alpine passes, such as the Gotthard and Simplon, remain vital arteries connecting north and south. These routes, once strategic military paths, now also support commerce and cultural exchange, further integrating Switzerland into European networks. The combination of mercenary fame, Renaissance learning, and strategic geography gives Switzerland a unique position in Europe. It is a land that is both outward-looking and fiercely independent. Its soldiers travel far, its scholars read widely, yet its communities retain their traditions, self-governance, and deep connection to the mountains and valleys. By the early 16th century, Switzerland stands at a crossroads. Its people are renowned across Europe for courage and skill. Its cities are centers of learning, and its valleys are places of endurance and stability. The era of mercenaries, trade, and Renaissance influence sets the stage for profound changes, religious transformation, political innovation, and the emergence of Switzerland as a distinct, self-governing confederation. The story of Swiss mercenaries and the Renaissance is not only one of war and learning, but of identity. The Confederation's people balance duty, faith, and curiosity, building a reputation for strength and wisdom. And through it all, the mountains watch silently, enduring as the backdrop to a land that has learned to thrive through adaptation, resilience, and unity. Imagine the streets of Zurich, Basel, and Geneva in the early 16th century. Bustling markets, merchants calling out their goods, and citizens gathering in town squares. Yet beneath the hum of daily life, a quiet but powerful force is stirring, a movement that will shake the foundations of faith, society, and governance in Switzerland. This is the dawn of the Reformation. The Reformation begins in Zurich, led by a man named Ulrich Zwingli. Born in 1484, Zwingli was educated in humanist traditions and deeply influenced by the ideas of reform spreading across Europe. He challenged the authority of the Catholic Church, calling for a return to Scripture, the rejection of indulgences, and a simpler, more direct relationship between the believer and God. Imagine Zwingli standing in the pulpit of the Grossminster, speaking passionately to townsfolk who lean forward to listen, their eyes bright with curiosity and concern. Zwingli's message spreads quickly. It appeals to citizens who are weary of church taxes and corruption, to merchants who see opportunity in change, and to educated men and women eager for clarity in faith. In Zurich, reforms are implemented swiftly. Images and statues are removed from churches. The Mass is simplified, and governance of the church becomes intertwined with the city council. The people of Zurich are both inspired and unsettled, for the changes challenge centuries of tradition. Elsewhere, the Reformation takes different shapes. In Geneva, John Calvin rises to prominence later in the century. Calvin, a French-born theologian, brings rigorous scholarship and a strict moral code, emphasizing discipline, education, and community oversight. Imagine the narrow streets of Geneva filled with citizens debating sermons, observing new church regulations, and attending schools founded to teach reading so that everyone can study the Bible themselves. Calvin's influence turns Geneva into a center of Protestant thought and a magnet for reformers across Europe. The Reformation is not only spiritual, it is political. Cities like Zurich, Basel, and Bern must navigate alliances, defend their autonomy, and sometimes clash with neighboring Catholic regions. Switzerland, with its mixture of Protestant and Catholic cantons, becomes a patchwork of religious affiliation. Conflicts erupt, sometimes violently, yet the Confederation endures. Cantons agree to coexist, recognizing the practical necessity of unity even amidst deep religious differences. Daily life is transformed, church rituals change, education expands, and moral oversight increases. Families gather to read scripture. Schools teach literacy for religious study, and citizens participate in communal decision-making shaped by both civic and spiritual concerns. Markets and festivals continue, but with new rules and expectations, reflecting the influence of reformist leaders. Trade, diplomacy, and scholarship also respond to the Reformation. Protestant cities often form alliances with other reformist regions in Europe, exchanging ideas, books, and even artisans. Catholic cantons maintain connections with Rome and neighboring Catholic states. This duality fosters a unique Swiss identity, fiercely independent, politically pragmatic, and culturally diverse. The Reformation's effects ripple across generations. Tensions between cantons remain, sometimes erupting in skirmishes, yet the Confederation develops mechanisms to manage conflict. Decisions about religion, governance, and law are negotiated in councils, assemblies, and treaties, laying the groundwork for Switzerland's later emphasis on federalism and neutrality. Amid these societal shifts, ordinary life continues in rhythm with the mountains and seasons. Farmers tend their fields, artisans craft their goods, children attend schools, newly founded by reformers, and families adapt to new religious practices. The Reformation reshapes both hearts and daily routines, blending profound change with continuity, creating a Switzerland that is resilient, diverse, and increasingly self-aware. By the late 16th century, Switzerland has emerged from the Reformation as a land of contrasts and cooperation. Protestant and Catholic cantons coexist within a single confederation, united by shared traditions, geography, and the need for mutual defense. The lessons of this era, adaptability, negotiation, and respect for local autonomy, become pillars of Swiss identity, guiding the Confederation through centuries of future challenges. The Reformation in Switzerland is not merely a religious upheaval, it is a defining chapter in the nation's evolution. It strengthens local governance, fosters education, cultivates tolerance, and prepares the people for a modern world that values independence, reason, and faith in both tradition and progress. Europe in the early 17th century is a land aflame with conflict. The 30 Years' War, beginning in 1618, engulfs the Holy Roman Empire, spreading devastation, famine, and disease across vast regions. Cities burn, armies march endlessly, and populations are uprooted. Yet in the heart of Europe, nestled among the Alps and the Jura Mountains, Switzerland watches, poised on a delicate edge between danger and survival. The Confederation, with its mix of Protestant and Catholic cantons, faces a challenge unlike any before. Many neighboring territories are drawn into the war's chaos, and Swiss cities feel the pressure from both sides. Mercenary armies, once a source of wealth, now pass too close for comfort, and foreign powers attempt to pull cantons into alliances. Yet Switzerland chooses a path that will define its history: neutrality. Imagine a council meeting in Zurich or Bern. The cantonal representatives gather, discussing threats from Catholic and Protestant powers alike. Each voice matters, each decision is weighed carefully. Switzerland's geography, fragmented into valleys and mountains, allows for defensive strategies, yet also complicates communication and unity. Neutrality is not a simple choice. It is a deliberate, carefully negotiated policy, rooted in survival, pragmatism, and the Confederation's commitment to local autonomy. Despite neutrality, the war is felt in daily life. Trade slows as borders become dangerous, markets shrink, and some Swiss towns host passing armies who pay or demand provisions. Villagers are cautious, tending fields with the awareness that conflict surrounds them. Still, the Confederation's internal governance continues. Local assemblies decide on tax collection, militia organization, and community defense. Cantons rely on one another for intelligence, coordination, and the maintenance of law and order. Swiss mercenaries continue to play a role, though now with even more caution. Many are hired by foreign powers, serving for pay in battles far from home. They carry with them not only skill but discipline, and their experiences abroad influence military tactics and strategies back in Switzerland. Yet these mercenaries always return to their home valleys, bound to their families, communities, and the Confederation itself. The 30 Years' War also accelerates a sense of Swiss identity. Despite religious differences and local rivalries, cantons recognize the value of unity in preserving independence. Agreements and alliances are reinforced, and the principle of neutrality becomes an essential pillar of foreign policy. Swiss cities, towns, and villages learn to navigate diplomacy with finesse, balancing relationships with powerful neighbors while protecting internal cohesion. Trade and culture adapt as well. Neutrality allows Switzerland to serve as a safe corridor for commerce, with merchants transporting goods through alpine passes and across rivers. Cities such as Basel, Geneva, and Zurich maintain connections with both Protestant and Catholic regions, facilitating the flow of ideas, literature, and science, even amidst a continent torn by war. Swiss neutrality becomes not only a political stance, but also an economic advantage. Daily life continues. With cautious resilience, farmers focus on harvests, herders manage livestock, artisans repair tools, and create goods for local use. Families maintain routines shaped by the seasons, religious practice, and communal governance. Education and scholarship continue in monasteries, schools, and universities, though always mindful of the surrounding turbulence. Life in Switzerland remains anchored in the rhythms of the land, even as Europe burns beyond the mountains. By the war's end in 1648, with the Peace of Westphalia, Switzerland's neutrality is formally recognized by European powers. The Confederation has navigated decades of peril without being drawn into devastating campaigns. Its territory remains largely intact, its communities resilient, and its identity as a neutral, independent confederation firmly established. This era leaves lasting lessons for Switzerland. Neutrality becomes a defining characteristic, shaping diplomacy, military policy, and national consciousness for centuries to come. The Confederation emerges from the chaos of the 30 Years' War, not weakened, but strengthened in cohesion, reputation, and strategic foresight. Through careful negotiation, local governance, and unity despite internal diversity, Switzerland survives one of Europe's deadliest conflicts intact. The mountains, valleys, and rivers once again provide protection and continuity, while the people's commitment to autonomy, prudence, and resilience ensures that their confederation will endure. Europe in the 18th century is buzzing with ideas, invention, and change. Across the continent, thinkers challenge old beliefs, question authority, and celebrate reason. In Switzerland, a land of mountains, valleys, and independent cantons, the Enlightenment arrives not with armies, but with ideas that flow through towns, cities, and even remote villages, shaping culture, governance, and daily life. Imagine the streets of Geneva in the early 1700s, cobblestone lanes lined with elegant houses, markets filled with merchants, and the soft hum of conversation as citizens discuss philosophy, science, and literature. Geneva becomes a hub for thinkers, writers, and reformers. It is here that Jean-Jacques Rousseau is born in 1712, a man whose ideas about society, education, and human nature will ripple across Europe and eventually the world. Rousseau's writings question established authority, emphasizing the importance of natural rights, civic participation, and the inherent dignity of each person. Imagine families gathered around a hearth, discussing the strange and new ideas of equality and liberty, ideas that challenge long-standing hierarchies while inspiring hope for a fairer society. These intellectual currents ripple through cities like Zurich, Basel, and Lausanne, influencing scholars, civic leaders, and educators. Switzerland's cantons, still largely autonomous, absorb Enlightenment ideas differently. Some embrace reform in administration, law, and education, while others maintain traditional structures. In cities like Bern and Zurich, schools expand, teaching literacy, mathematics, and sciences. Libraries grow, filled with books imported from France, Italy, and Germany. Printing presses flourish, spreading knowledge more widely than ever before. Citizens have access to ideas that once circulated only in elite circles. Trade and economy also benefit from these intellectual shifts. Swiss merchants, bankers, and artisans apply rational thought to their crafts. Textile production improves in cities such as Zurich and St. Gallen. Watchmaking expands in the Jura Mountains, and commerce grows along rivers and passes connecting Switzerland to France, Italy, and Germany. The flow of goods mirrors the flow of ideas. Both travel steadily, crossing borders, enriching the Confederation, and fostering a sense of connection to the wider world. Life in the countryside continues with its familiar rhythms, yet even there, Enlightenment ideals leave subtle marks. Farmers experiment with new crop rotation methods. Herders adopt improved breeding techniques, and local councils discuss ways to improve infrastructure, such as bridges, roads, and water management. Villages remain connected to the land, but they also begin to participate in a broader intellectual and economic network that stretches beyond the mountains. Religion continues to play a role, but it is tempered by reason and debate. The coexistence of Protestant and Catholic cantons encourages moderation, dialogue, and tolerance. Philosophical discussion blends with spiritual life, creating a culture in which civic and religious responsibility coexist with inquiry, skepticism, and reform. Switzerland's landscape of independent cantons, shaped by centuries of self-governance, provides a fertile ground for Enlightenment thought. Local assemblies continue to manage resources, laws, and community affairs, while simultaneously engaging with broader European currents of philosophy, science, and politics. Imagine a council in Basel discussing legal reform while considering the ideas of Montesquieu or Voltaire. Swiss leaders adapt and implement these concepts in ways suited to their unique environment. The Enlightenment also nurtures artistic and cultural growth. Painters, musicians, and architects experiment with new forms and techniques. Public squares and private homes feature refined design, blending function and beauty. The natural world, Switzerland's mountains, rivers, and forests, inspires writers, scientists, and travelers alike who document landscapes, study flora and fauna, and share discoveries with curious minds across Europe. By the end of the 18th century, Switzerland is a land at once rooted in tradition and open to progress. Its people, shaped by centuries of independence, resilience, and careful diplomacy, engage with new ideas while maintaining local customs. Trade, education, philosophy, and culture thrive, creating a society that values reason, community, and self-governance. This era sets the stage for dramatic changes to come: revolutionary ideas, foreign invasions, and political upheavals that will test the Confederation's unity and adaptability. Yet, the Enlightenment leaves a lasting legacy, a Swiss identity that balances freedom and responsibility, tradition and innovation, independence and engagement with the world beyond the mountains. The year is 1798. Across the Rhine and the Alps, Europe trembles under the forces of revolution. France has risen in rebellion, overthrowing kings and spreading ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity. These ideals do not remain confined to French borders. They ripple outward, reaching the valleys and cities of Switzerland. The Confederation, long proud of its independence and traditions, now faces a wave of change, unlike any it has known. French revolutionary armies march into Switzerland, asserting control with a mixture of military strength and ideological zeal. Cantons accustomed to self-governance find themselves under pressure. Traditional structures, centuries old, are challenged. Noble privileges, local autonomy, and church influence are all questioned. Imagine the townsfolk of Zurich or Bern watching foreign troops cross the passes, uncertain whether to resist, cooperate, or adapt. In the wake of the invasion, the Helvetic Republic is proclaimed. For the first time, Switzerland is reorganized into a centralized state, replacing the loose confederation of independent cantons. Cities and rural areas alike are integrated under a uniform constitution with equal rights promised to citizens regardless of their traditional status or location. Local assemblies are replaced by new governing bodies, and old hierarchies of feudal lords and abbots are dismantled. Life during the Helvetic Republic is turbulent. Administrative reforms, taxation, and conscription challenge local customs. People must adapt to new laws, new officials, and new systems of justice. Villages and towns, previously used to self-rule, now navigate the complexities of a centralized authority. Change is rapid, unsettling, and often resisted. Yet for some, the reforms bring opportunities: equality before the law, access to education, and greater mobility for those previously constrained by social class. Trade and commerce continue under the Helvetic Republic, though disrupted by military campaigns and political upheaval. Merchants and artisans adapt, moving goods along established routes while complying with new regulations. The Alpine passes, always strategic, are closely watched and controlled. The Republic's leaders attempt to modernize infrastructure, standardize currency, and encourage communication between regions. But local resistance and the challenge of geography slow progress. Religion, long intertwined with Swiss society, faces significant change. Church lands are secularized, and clergy are subjected to new rules. The separation of church and state is enforced more rigorously than ever before. This creates tension, particularly in Catholic regions, yet it also lays the groundwork for a society in which civil authority and spiritual life are increasingly distinct. Despite these upheavals, the Helvetic Republic is short-lived. By 1803, under pressure from internal revolts and European powers, the centralized state collapses. Napoleon Bonaparte intervenes, issuing the Act of Mediation, which restores much of the cantonal independence while maintaining some modernizing reforms. Switzerland returns to a confederation, but now with lessons learned. Unity and local autonomy must coexist, and the confederation must adapt to survive in a changing Europe. The period of the French Revolution and the Helvetic Republic leaves a deep imprint on Swiss identity. Citizens experience both the promise and the challenge of centralized governance, witnessing the fragility of long-standing traditions. When confronted by revolutionary forces, they learn the value of negotiation, compromise, and pragmatic adaptation, skills that will guide Switzerland through the 19th and 20th centuries. Daily life in the aftermath stabilizes slowly. Farmers return to their fields. Artisans rebuild workshops, and families navigate the new legal and social landscape. Schools and public institutions adapt to reforms, combining old traditions with new ideas. Swiss society emerges with a renewed sense of resilience, having weathered an extraordinary storm of political and ideological upheaval. The Helvetic Republic may have been brief, but its impact endures. It introduces concepts of equality, civil rights, and centralized administration, even as Switzerland retains its Confederation of Cantons. This balance of innovation and tradition, independence and cooperation will continue to define the Swiss way for centuries to come. Imagine Switzerland at the dawn of the 19th century, a land of mountains and valleys, towns and villages, still recovering from the upheavals of revolution, invasion, and the short-lived Helvetic Republic. The Napoleonic era has left its mark, and across Europe, ideas of nationalism, democracy, and modernization are beginning to spread. Switzerland, with its unique confederation, is on the cusp of transformation. After Napoleon's Act of Mediation in 1803 restores much of cantonal independence, the Confederation becomes more cohesive, yet retains a strong local identity. The cantons regain authority over internal affairs, but they are now more connected than ever, bound by agreements on defense, trade, and legal matters. Picture a council in Bern or Zurich, representatives from various cantons discussing matters of commerce, law, and infrastructure, striving to balance autonomy with unity. The mid-19th century is a time of tension and change. Religious and political divides resurface, culminating in the Sonderbund War of 1847. 7 Catholic cantons form the Sonderbund, a defensive alliance to resist perceived threats from the increasingly liberal Protestant cantons. The conflict is brief but decisive. The federal army, composed of forces from other cantons, prevails, and Switzerland emerges from the war with a strengthened commitment to unity under a federal framework. In 1848, Switzerland takes a decisive step toward modernity. The federal constitution is adopted, creating the Swiss Confederation as a federal state with a balance of power between the national government and the cantons. The Constitution introduces democratic principles, civil liberties, and a legal framework for governance. Imagine citizens in town squares reading proclamations, attending assemblies, and engaging in debates about their rights and responsibilities. Switzerland's path toward democracy is deliberate, measured, and deeply rooted in centuries of local governance. Economy and infrastructure begin to evolve rapidly during this period. Railways stretch through valleys and over mountains, connecting towns, cities, and markets in ways previously unimaginable. Industrialization begins in cities like Zurich, Basel, and St. Gallen, with textile factories, watchmaking, and other trades transforming urban life. Farmers benefit from new agricultural techniques, improved tools, and access to wider markets. Switzerland balances tradition with innovation, preserving rural life while embracing industrial progress. Education flourishes under the new federal system. Schools expand, literacy rises, and universities in Basel, Zurich, and Geneva attract students from across Europe. Scientific inquiry, engineering, and arts benefit from this environment of learning and reform. Libraries, academies, and museums grow, offering knowledge and inspiration to citizens of all backgrounds. Swiss neutrality, carefully cultivated since the 30 Years' War, becomes an official principle. The country avoids entanglement in external conflicts, focusing on internal stability, trade, and diplomacy. This neutrality allows Switzerland to develop economically, politically, and culturally. While much of Europe experiences upheaval, revolutions, and wars, daily life for ordinary citizens is shaped by these changes. In rural villages, families continue agricultural traditions, tending crops and livestock in harmony with the seasons. In towns, artisans, merchants, and workers navigate the rhythms of trade, industry, and urban growth. Social life evolves too, with clubs, societies, and cultural gatherings enriching community life. Festivals, markets, and religious observances continue, blending centuries-old tradition with new civic ideals. By the end of the 19th century, Switzerland has emerged as a stable modern federal state. Its cantons retain local autonomy, yet they operate within a cohesive national framework. Democracy, civil liberties, neutrality, and economic innovation define the nation. Mountains and valleys, long sources of protection and identity, now coexist with railways, factories, and thriving urban centers. The 19th century is a period of consolidation and transformation, setting the foundation for the Switzerland we recognize today. The federal constitution, industrial progress, education, and infrastructure create a resilient, adaptable society able to face the challenges of the modern era while preserving the traditions and values that have defined it for centuries. Picture Switzerland at the dawn of the 20th century, a land of serene mountains, deep valleys, and bustling cities. Across Europe, storm clouds gather, nationalism, alliances, and tensions threaten to plunge the continent into the most devastating conflicts it has ever known. Switzerland, nestled amid powerful neighbors, faces a delicate challenge: how to preserve its independence, protect its people, and navigate a world at war. During the First World War, from 1914 to 1918, Switzerland maintains its long-standing policy of neutrality. The Confederation mobilizes its army, fortifies mountain passes, and establishes civil defense measures. Yet it does not join the fighting. Imagine soldiers stationed along alpine ridges, watchful but vigilant, while families continue their daily lives in villages and cities. Factories produce goods, farmers tend crops, and communities work together to manage shortages and maintain order. Neutrality requires constant diplomacy. Switzerland becomes a hub for communication, negotiation, and humanitarian work. The Red Cross, headquartered in Geneva, coordinates relief for soldiers and civilians alike. Refugees find temporary shelter, medical care is provided across borders, and Swiss officials serve as intermediaries between warring nations. This role strengthens Switzerland's international reputation as a nation dedicated to peace, impartiality, and humanitarianism. Economically, the war brings both challenges and opportunities. Trade disruptions force Switzerland to adapt, relying on domestic production and careful management of resources. Currency, banking, and commerce adjust to the pressures of a continent at war. The industrial and financial sectors play a critical role, ensuring that the nation remains functional despite the turmoil surrounding it. Between the wars, Switzerland experiences social and political evolutions. Democratic reforms expand, workers organize for rights, and education and culture flourish. Cities like Zurich, Basel, and Geneva grow as centers of arts, science, and innovation. The Confederation balances tradition with modernity, preserving local governance while integrating advances in infrastructure, technology, and social welfare. When the Second World War erupts in 1939, Switzerland faces an even greater challenge. Surrounded by Axis and Allied powers, the nation must prepare for potential invasion. The Swiss government enforces a policy of armed neutrality, mobilizing the military, fortifying key passes, and preparing civilian defense plans. Citizens are trained for civil protection, supply networks are secured, and communication channels are closely monitored. Swiss diplomacy becomes crucial. Negotiations with both Axis and Allied powers aim to preserve sovereignty while avoiding direct involvement in combat. Switzerland's neutrality is tested repeatedly, yet the Confederation manages to navigate the storm. Its geographic advantage, the Alps forming natural defensive barriers, combines with careful planning and the resilience of its people to deter invasion and maintain independence. Daily life during the wars is marked by vigilance, rationing, and adaptation. Families conserve food, industry shifts production to essential goods, and communities support one another. Education continues, albeit with modifications, and cultural life adapts to wartime conditions. Across cities and villages, the rhythm of daily existence persists, anchored by the mountains and by shared values of independence, neutrality, and civic responsibility. Switzerland also serves as a sanctuary. Refugees from surrounding countries, fleeing conflict and persecution, find shelter in Swiss towns. Humanitarian organizations coordinate aid, providing medical care, food, and protection. Hospitals, shelters, and relief centers become lifelines, demonstrating Switzerland's commitment to humanitarian principles even amidst the threat of war. By the end of the Second World War, in 1945, Switzerland emerges intact, sovereign, and unbroken. Its neutrality, combined with careful planning, diplomacy, and a strong sense of national unity, preserves the nation while much of Europe lies in ruins. The country's experience during the World Wars reinforces the values of resilience, pragmatism, and collective responsibility, principles that will guide it in the post-war era. The World Wars leave a lasting imprint on Swiss society. Neutrality becomes more than a policy. It becomes a defining characteristic of the national identity. Economic stability, social cohesion, and humanitarian engagement are strengthened. Switzerland's mountains, valleys, and cities stand as silent witnesses to a nation that has navigated the storms of global conflict without losing its independence, culture, or sense of self. Imagine Switzerland in the late 1940s. The echoes of global conflict have faded, and the mountains and valleys stand in quiet, enduring strength. The cities are filled with the gentle rhythm of rebuilding, commerce, and innovation. Families return to daily routines, schools reopen fully, and industries shift from wartime production to peacetime prosperity. Switzerland, untouched by invasion, but shaped by the world around it, enters a period of modernization, growth, and transformation. The post-war era brings economic expansion, manufacturing, banking, and precision industries thrive. Switzerland's famed watchmaking, already renowned, expands further into international markets. Factories produce machinery, electronics, and textiles, while banks manage the increasing flow of global capital. Cities like Zurich, Basel, and Geneva become hubs of finance, trade, and innovation. Imagine the busy streets of Zurich, trams gliding along cobbled lanes, storefronts displaying the latest products, and workshops humming with activity. Infrastructure develops rapidly. Roads, bridges, and railways are modernized, connecting remote valleys with urban centers and facilitating trade and travel. The Gotthard and Simplon passes, once vital trade routes in medieval times, are improved and expanded, easing the movement of people, goods, and ideas. Hydroelectric projects harness mountain rivers, providing energy for industry and households, while technological innovation begins to transform daily life. Education and research flourish. Universities expand, new institutions are founded, and scientific inquiry accelerates. Students study medicine, engineering, chemistry, and social sciences, while research institutes collaborate with international partners. Literacy, already high, continues to improve, and public libraries, museums, and cultural centers become vibrant hubs of learning and creativity. Social development accompanies economic growth. Healthcare expands, housing projects improve urban living conditions, and social safety nets provide security for the elderly, the sick, and families. Women's participation in education and the workforce gradually increases, reflecting a society slowly embracing broader social equality. Civic engagement grows, with citizens participating actively in cantonal and federal decision-making. Switzerland's neutrality, tested during the World Wars, continues to define its foreign policy. The Confederation engages diplomatically with international organizations, participates in humanitarian initiatives, and offers itself as a mediator in global conflicts. Geneva, in particular, becomes a center of international diplomacy, hosting institutions such as the United Nations, the Red Cross, and various international agencies. Imagine diplomats from around the world walking along the quays of Lake Geneva, discussing treaties, aid, and cooperation, while the Alps rise silently in the background. Culture and the arts flourish. Swiss painters, writers, musicians, and filmmakers explore both tradition and modernity, drawing inspiration from the landscape and the rapidly changing world. Folk traditions are preserved alongside new artistic movements, blending history with contemporary expression. Festivals, theater performances, and exhibitions create a lively cultural life, enriching communities across the Confederation. Rural life continues alongside urban modernization. Farmers adopt mechanized equipment, improve crop yields, and diversify production while maintaining connections to the land and seasonal rhythms. Alpine pastures and villages retain their charm, offering continuity in the face of rapid societal changes. Communities balance modern convenience with respect for centuries-old practices, preserving the link between people and landscape. Tourism emerges as a significant aspect of the Swiss economy. Visitors are drawn to snow-capped peaks, tranquil lakes, historic towns, and picturesque villages. Ski resorts, hiking trails, and wellness retreats develop, connecting the world to Switzerland's natural beauty. Imagine the quiet of early morning in a mountain valley, mist drifting through pine forests, while the distant echo of cowbells creates a timeless rhythm, inviting visitors to experience both serenity and adventure. By the 1970s and 1980s, Switzerland is firmly established as a prosperous, modern, and stable nation. Democracy, neutrality, and federalism continue to guide governance. Innovation, education, and culture thrive, while traditional values and local autonomy remain respected. Citizens enjoy high standards of living, quality healthcare, and strong social cohesion. Post-war modernization transforms Switzerland without erasing its identity. Mountains, rivers, valleys, and towns remain familiar and enduring, while the country adapts to a rapidly changing world. Economic growth, social progress, and cultural vitality coexist with centuries-old traditions, creating a Switzerland that is both modern and deeply connected to its past. Through careful balance, innovation, and resilience, Switzerland emerges from the post-war era ready to face the challenges of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. A nation at once peaceful, prosperous, and profoundly rooted in its history. Imagine Switzerland in the 1970s and 1980s, a country of soaring peaks, sparkling lakes, and vibrant cities, yet quietly attuned to the changes sweeping across Europe and the world. Technology, communication, and international trade are transforming societies everywhere, and Switzerland navigates these transformations while maintaining its unique identity, traditions, and neutrality. Economically, Switzerland thrives. Banking and finance expand further, building on centuries of expertise. Zurich and Geneva become global financial centers, attracting investment, innovation, and talent. Industrial production continues to modernize, with precision engineering, pharmaceuticals, and high-quality manufacturing driving growth. Small businesses flourish alongside multinational corporations, creating a diverse and resilient economy. Infrastructure develops at an unprecedented pace. Highways, tunnels, and rail systems connect urban and rural regions, while airports facilitate international travel. The Gotthard Base Tunnel, still in planning stages in this period, represents the country's long-term vision for connectivity and engineering excellence. Cities expand thoughtfully, balancing growth with preservation of historical architecture and natural surroundings. Swiss society experiences social and political evolution. Women gain greater representation in politics, education, and professional life. Debates over social policy, environmental protection, and civil rights gain prominence. The direct democracy system, where citizens vote on referenda and initiatives, allows individuals to actively shape legislation and governance, reinforcing Switzerland's tradition of participatory politics. Culture and the arts flourish in the late 20th century. Swiss filmmakers, writers, painters, and musicians gain international recognition, blending local tradition with modern influences. Festivals celebrate folk heritage, alongside contemporary artistic expression. Museums, galleries, and concert halls in Basel, Zurich, and Geneva become hubs for cultural exchange and innovation, attracting audiences from around the world. Education and research remain priorities. Universities expand programs in science, technology, medicine, and the humanities. Swiss research institutions collaborate internationally, producing advances in engineering, medicine, and environmental science. Literacy and educational attainment rise steadily, creating a highly skilled and engaged citizenry. Switzerland continues to navigate its role on the global stage. Neutrality, carefully maintained for centuries, allows the country to serve as a mediator in international conflicts. Host organizations like the Red Cross and United Nations offices and engage diplomatically without becoming entangled in wars. Swiss diplomacy emphasizes humanitarianism, mediation, and global cooperation, enhancing the country's international reputation. Environmental awareness begins to take hold. The Swiss alpine landscape, forests, and lakes are recognized as precious resources requiring careful stewardship. National parks, conservation projects, and policies protecting air and water quality reflect a growing understanding that natural beauty and ecological health are integral to quality of life. Imagine hiking trails winding through forests where wildflowers bloom, rivers flowing clean and clear, and mountain peaks standing timeless, all maintained through careful balance between development and conservation. Tourism continues to expand. Ski resorts, hiking trails, lakeside retreats, and historic towns attract visitors from across the globe. Tourists experience Switzerland's natural beauty, cultural richness, and urban sophistication, contributing to the economy while connecting the country to the wider world. Cities, towns, and villages adapt to welcome guests while preserving local charm, blending modern amenities with centuries-old tradition. By the end of the 20th century, Switzerland is a nation defined by stability, prosperity, and balance. The Confederation's cantons retain autonomy while operating within a strong federal framework. Democracy, neutrality, and civic engagement shape politics. Economic innovation and cultural creativity flourish, alongside preservation of tradition and the natural environment. Swiss identity in this period is a blend of past and present. Centuries of independence, resilience, and neutrality inform contemporary life. Mountains, valleys, and rivers continue to anchor the people, while cities, education, and industry reflect adaptation to a globalized, modern world. Switzerland in the late 20th century is both timeless and forward-looking, a nation able to embrace change while honoring its history. Picture Switzerland as the new millennium begins, a nation of snow-capped peaks, serene lakes, and bustling cities, yet quietly rooted in centuries of tradition. Across Europe and the globe, technology, communication, and globalization are transforming societies, and Switzerland navigates these changes with its characteristic blend of pragmatism, neutrality, and innovation. Economically, Switzerland continues to thrive. The finance sector remains strong, with Zurich and Geneva serving as global banking and investment hubs. Pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, and precision engineering drive innovation, while small and medium enterprises flourish alongside multinational corporations. Agriculture evolves with modern techniques, sustainable practices, and niche markets, maintaining a connection to the land while meeting contemporary demands. Technology and infrastructure advance rapidly. High-speed trains, efficient highways, and modern airports enhance connectivity across the Confederation and beyond. Telecommunications and digital networks link cities, towns, and villages, enabling commerce, education, and social connection. Renewable energy projects, including hydroelectric, solar, and wind, grow in prominence, reflecting an awareness of environmental responsibility alongside modernization. Swiss politics maintain a unique character. The federal system balances cantonal autonomy with national cohesion, while direct democracy allows citizens to influence legislation through referenda and initiatives. Social debates over healthcare, education, immigration, and climate policy unfold through dialogue and voting, reflecting a society deeply engaged with governance. Neutrality continues as a guiding principle, enabling Switzerland to act as a mediator, humanitarian hub, and diplomatic partner without military entanglement. Education and research flourish like never before. Universities and technical institutes collaborate internationally, producing innovations in medicine, engineering, environmental science, and the humanities. Students from around the world are drawn to Swiss programs, and homegrown talent contributes to a highly skilled, globally connected workforce. Libraries, museums, and cultural centers expand, blending tradition with contemporary ideas, technology, and creative expression. Culture thrives alongside economic and technological growth. Swiss filmmakers, writers, musicians, and visual artists gain international recognition while maintaining connections to local traditions. Festivals, exhibitions, and performances celebrate the diversity of language, culture, and heritage across German, French, Italian, and Romansh regions. Folk traditions continue alongside contemporary arts, creating a vibrant cultural tapestry. Switzerland's natural environment remains central to identity. The Alps, lakes, and forests are carefully preserved and sustainably managed. National parks, protected landscapes, and conservation initiatives balance human activity with ecological responsibility. Imagine a quiet alpine morning, mist over pine forests, cowbells echoing through valleys, rivers glistening in the sun, timeless beauty preserved amid a modernizing world. Tourism continues to be a vital part of the economy. Visitors explore snow-clad mountains, tranquil lakes, historic towns, and vibrant cities. Switzerland's ability to balance modern amenities with natural and cultural heritage makes it a unique destination, drawing travelers who seek both comfort and authenticity. Swiss society faces modern challenges with pragmatism and resilience. Immigration, global trade, environmental concerns, and technological change are navigated through careful policy, civic engagement, and public discourse. Citizens participate actively in shaping the nation's future, guided by centuries of democratic tradition and a strong sense of shared responsibility. By the early 21st century, Switzerland has established itself as a model of stability, prosperity, and balance. Its economy, infrastructure, and education are world class. Democracy Neutrality and federalism continue to guide governance. Culture, tradition, and natural beauty coexist with modern innovation and global engagement. Switzerland in the 21st century is both a continuation of its long history and a reflection of modernity. Mountains, valleys, and rivers remain timeless anchors, while cities, technology, and global connections shape the daily lives of citizens. It is a nation that honors its past, embraces the present, and prepares thoughtfully for the future. Imagine Switzerland today, a land of majestic mountains, tranquil lakes, and vibrant cities where centuries of history meet the pulse of modern life. Across its valleys and peaks, the legacy of independence, neutrality, and resilience is visible everywhere, from the bustling streets of Zurich and Geneva to the quiet villages nestled in the Alps. Switzerland is both a reflection of its past and a beacon for the present. The nation thrives economically, culturally, and socially. Banking, finance, pharmaceuticals, and precision engineering continue to drive innovation, while tourism connects millions of visitors with Switzerland's natural beauty and rich heritage. Swiss cities balance modernity with tradition, combining historical architecture, cultural institutions, and cutting-edge technology. Imagine walking along the shores of Lake Geneva, watching the Alps rise in the distance, while cafes and museums hum with activity. Education and research remain central to Swiss identity. Universities and technical institutes lead in medicine, engineering, and environmental studies, while international collaboration brings new ideas and technologies. Citizens enjoy high literacy, access to knowledge, and opportunities for lifelong learning. Public spaces, libraries, museums, galleries reflect both the nation's heritage and its ongoing creativity. Switzerland's political system continues to exemplify stability and participation. Federalism ensures that cantons maintain autonomy, while direct democracy allows citizens to influence laws and policy. Decisions are deliberated carefully, reflecting centuries of governance shaped by negotiation, compromise, and respect for diversity. Neutrality remains a guiding principle, allowing Switzerland to serve as a mediator, humanitarian hub, and partner in global cooperation. Cultural life flourishes in harmony with history and innovation. Folk traditions, music, festivals, and arts coexist with contemporary performance, film, literature, and design. Switzerland's multilingual nature, German, French, Italian, and Romansh, enriches its cultural landscape, creating a mosaic of identity, expression, and community. Imagine towns celebrating centuries-old festivals, while theaters stage modern performances, blending old and new seamlessly. The environment remains central to Swiss life. Alpine peaks, forests, lakes, and rivers are preserved and carefully managed. Conservation projects, national parks, and sustainable practices ensure that nature remains a living part of daily life. Hikers, skiers, and nature enthusiasts explore trails that have existed for centuries, connecting with the same landscapes that shaped generations of Swiss citizens. Switzerland's global legacy is remarkable. Its neutrality, diplomacy, and humanitarian work influence international policy. The Red Cross, The United Nations offices in Geneva and countless treaties and negotiations reflect Switzerland's role as a trusted, impartial actor. At the same time, Swiss innovation, culture, and economic stability serve as a model for resilience, adaptability, and thoughtful governance. Daily life in Switzerland balances continuity and modernity. Families in alpine villages tend farms and livestock, while urban citizens work in finance, technology, education, and arts. Public transportation, healthcare, and social services ensure stability, while local and national governance empower citizens to actively shape their communities. The rhythms of life, seasonal work, festivals, education, and civic engagement flow alongside global connectedness, creating a harmonious society. Switzerland today is a land that embodies centuries of history, a confederation shaped by mountains, wars, reform, revolution, innovation, and culture. Its people honor traditions while embracing change. Its cities blend old and new. Its mountains stand timeless, a witness to resilience and continuity. Its values, neutrality, independence, cooperation, and civic responsibility, remain guiding principles in a complex, modern world. The story of Switzerland is far from over. From the early Cantons defending themselves in medieval battles to a modern confederation engaged in global diplomacy, the nation's journey is one of adaptation, unity, and enduring identity. Mountains, valleys, lakes, and cities continue to nurture a society that values both heritage and progress, creating a unique, peaceful, and prosperous country. Now, with a smile on your face, you will have a good understanding of Switzerland, its history, culture, identity, and global significance, and perhaps even a sense of calm and wonder as you drift toward sleep. Goodbye, dear friend. See you next time.